Mark watched the rain hit the window, listening to its steady patter. He had just returned from his Aunt Alara's funeral. The living room was crowded, yet he felt an emptiness inside. The crowd made him wonder where everyone had been during Aunt Alara's long, solitary final years. His gaze fixed on the gray sky outside the window, ignoring the distant voices. His siblings were discussing legal procedures and inheritance shares after the funeral. A cold air hung between them, and Mark could feel it. He felt like he didn't belong. No one turned to him or asked, "How are you?" The sense of alienation he felt the moment he entered the room was a habit that had lasted for years. For the past 3 years, Mark had been Aunt Alara's sole caregiver. He'd quit his job and moved into her old, somber house. Every day he cooked, cleaned, administered medication, and stayed by her side. He was the only one holding her hand during the difficult nights. His siblings, on the other hand, rarely visited, always having an excuse. But Mark never said a word against them. He just kept doing what he believed was right. When his aunt's cough worsened or her fever spiked, they were either on business trips or busy with their children's school activities. Mark, meanwhile, silently endured. Things got worse the morning after the funeral. His siblings told him the house would be sold and the money split among them. They didn't ask Mark anything. It was as if the decision had already been made. Mark was shocked but didn't protest. He packed his belongings and left quietly, heartbroken. As he walked out the door, he felt the echo of the last moments he'd shared with his aunt, the silent laughs and sobs. A few days later, he received a call from the family lawyer. The lawyer invited him to his office to discuss the will. Mark was confused. His siblings had told him everything would be shared equally. He hadn't expected anything different. At the lawyer's office, he learned the truth. Aunt Alara had changed her will 6 months earlier. Everything, the house, the money, all of it, was left to Mark. Everything was legal and signed. His aunt had also written a letter explaining her decision. In the letter, she thanked Mark for his love, time, and care. The lawyer said there was no mistake. When his siblings found out, they were furious. They accused Mark of tricking their aunt. They demanded he give them a share, but Mark remembered all the times they had ignored him and their aunt. He remained calm and said no. The lawyer reconfirmed that everything had been done properly. Mark decided to keep the house and donate some of the money to charities his aunt loved to support. He gave nothing to his siblings. One day, he walked out of the house with peace in his heart, ready to start a new life, a life he truly earned. 2 years before the funeral, Mark's life had changed completely. When Aunt Alara became seriously ill, Mark didn't hesitate. He left his job, packed his things, and returned to the house where he grew up. His aunt needed someone, and Mark chose to be that person. No one asked him to do it. He just knew it was the right thing. Every day Mark was there. He prepared meals, gave medicine, cleaned, and helped his aunt with everything. Some days were peaceful. Others were full of pain and worry. Through it all, Mark remained strong. He never spoke about how tired he was. He didn't ask for help or praise. He kept going one day at a time. His siblings lived their own lives. They didn't call much. They didn't visit unless it was a holiday or a special occasion. Even when the doctor said their aunt didn't have much time left, they stayed away. Sometimes they sent short messages, but they never stayed long. Mark didn't understand how they could be so distant, but he never argued or complained. In the quiet hours when the house was still and his aunt was resting, Mark often sat by the window. He would hold his aunt's hand or just listen to her breathe. There were moments when his aunt would smile or whisper thanks. Those little things kept Mark going. He didn't expect anything in return. Just being there was enough for him. Money was tight. Without a job, Mark had to be careful. He used what savings he had and sometimes skipped small things to ensure his aunt had everything she needed. There were hard days, but he never said anything to his siblings. He didn't want to cause trouble. As time went on, Mark and Aunt Alara grew even closer. They talked, laughed, and cried. His aunt shared stories, memories, and even regrets. Mark listened. He knew these moments were precious. He wanted to hold on to every one of them. When things got worse, Mark stayed up at night to watch over his aunt. He learned how to do small medical tasks just to make her more comfortable. There were no nurses most of the time, just Mark and his care. His aunt often told him, "You're my angel." Mark would smile and say, "I'm just your nephew." No one else saw those moments. No one else knew how much love and effort Mark gave, but he didn't care. His only goal was to ensure his aunt never felt alone. That promise he kept until the very end. The morning after the funeral, Mark was still trying to process everything. His aunt was gone, and the house felt cold and silent. He sat in the kitchen holding a cup of tea when his siblings walked in. They didn't ask how he was or say anything kind. One of them placed a stack of papers on the table. Without much emotion, they told him they were selling the house. Mark looked at them, confused. They spoke as if the decision had already been made. One said they had found a real estate agent. Another said he had 1 week to pack his things and move out. There was no discussion. They didn't ask if he had somewhere to go or what he thought. They simply told him he had no choice. He tried to speak, but they cut him off. One said, "It's for the best." Another added, "We all need our share." Mark sat there, frozen. He had lived in that house for the last 3 years, cared for their aunt every single day. And now he was being treated like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. They acted like he was in the way. Their words were cold, and their eyes showed no kindness. Mark wanted to scream, but he didn't. He kept his head down and listened. His heart was heavy, but he stayed calm. Later that day, he quietly began to pack his things. He moved from room to room, placing his belongings in boxes. Every corner held a memory. The living room where he sat with his aunt, the kitchen where he cooked their favorite meals. Now, all of it was being taken away. He didn't argue with his siblings. He didn't beg them to let him stay. He just packed and made plans to leave. At night, he lay awake, wondering how things had come to this. But he said nothing. By the end of the week, he was ready to go. His siblings didn't offer to help or say goodbye. Mark walked out of the house with tears in his eyes, feeling lost and unwanted. He had given so much, but in return, he was pushed aside. All he could do was keep walking. A few days after leaving the house, Mark got a phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. On the other end, a calm voice introduced himself as Mr. Tainer, the family's lawyer. Mark remembered him from his childhood, though they hadn't spoken in years. He sounded serious and asked him to come to his office as soon as possible.
He said it was about his aunt's will.
Mark didn't understand why. His siblings had already told him the estate would be divided among them all. He thought everything had been settled. Still, he agreed to meet him the next morning. He didn't expect anything surprising. He assumed it was just paperwork or maybe a formal closing of his aunt's affairs. That night, he thought about the past few days. Everything had happened so fast. From the funeral to being told to leave the house, it had all been painful. Now the lawyer wanted to speak to him directly. It felt strange, but he didn't think too much of it. The next day, he arrived at the office. It was a quiet building filled with books and framed certificates. Mr. Tainer greeted him kindly and asked him to sit. He opened a folder and gently told him that his aunt had updated her will months before she passed. Mark sat still, unsure what that meant. Mr. Tainer explained that his aunt had made some big changes. He said that the will had been legally updated with witnesses present, and everything was properly signed. Mark listened quietly, trying to follow every word. He paused for a moment, then told him that his aunt had left everything to him, the house, the savings, and all personal belongings. Mark's eyes widened.
He didn't know what to say.
Mr. Tainer showed him the documents and explained that his aunt had written a letter along with the will. In it, she thanked Mark for the care, the love, and the time he had given. His aunt made it clear that Mark had been the one who stood by her side, and this was her way of saying thank you. Mark was silent. It didn't feel real. He had never asked for anything. He only wanted to be there for his aunt. Now, he was hearing that his aunt had noticed everything and made a final choice because of it. Mr. Tainer reassured him that everything was legal and final. Mark nodded slowly, holding the papers in his hand. For the first time in days, He felt something shift. Not joy, not pride, just quiet understanding. Mark listened carefully as Mr. Tainer continued. His tone was steady, but the news felt heavy on his shoulders. He explained that his aunt had visited his office 6 months before she died and made serious changes to her will. It was not rushed or done in confusion. Everything was planned and handled with full legal care. His aunt had made a final decision to leave the full estate to Mark. This included the house, all the money in the bank, and every legal asset connected to her name. Mr. Tainer said the documents had been signed properly and witnessed. There was no room for doubt or misunderstanding. It was now official and binding. The entire estate belonged to Mark alone. The words were difficult to take in. His thoughts moved quickly. This wasn't what he had expected. In his heart, he had never imagined receiving everything. A mix of shock and quiet emotion filled the room. Mr. Tainer handed him a copy of the signed will and a personal letter written by his aunt. The handwriting was familiar. It brought back memories of gentle notes left on the fridge and little messages tucked into his books. This one was different. His aunt had poured her thoughts and feelings into the letter. In the message, his aunt wrote about the last years of her life. She spoke about the pain of her illness, the loneliness she sometimes felt, and how Mark's presence gave her comfort and peace. She said that only one nephew had truly been there. One nephew had left everything behind to be close, to help, to listen. That nephew was Mark. His aunt admitted that others might not understand the decision, but she made it with a full heart. She had seen who truly cared, not just in words, but in actions. Her wish was to leave everything to the one who had been by her side when it mattered most. There was no anger in the letter, only truth. His aunt didn't speak badly about the others. She simply wrote that love must be returned with love, and that's what she was doing with this final gift. Mr. Tainer explained that the will had already been filed and approved. The estate was already in Mark's name. No one could change it. No one could contest it. Holding the letter, his eyes filled with quiet tears. This was not about money or property. It was about being seen, being valued, and being remembered. His aunt had spoken her final words in ink, words of thanks, of love, and of trust. And now Mark finally understood the depth of that love. When the news spread that everything had been left to Mark, his siblings reacted with anger and disbelief. They didn't call to ask how he was or try to understand. Instead, they sent long messages and angry voice notes saying there must be a mistake. One of them even claimed the papers had to be fake. Another said Mark must have tricked their aunt somehow. They couldn't believe their names weren't included in the will. They acted like it wasn't possible. Mark didn't reply right away. He read each message quietly and tried to stay calm, even as the words cut deep. His phone kept ringing. One sibling said they wanted to meet face-to-face to talk it through. But Mark already knew it wouldn't be a simple talk. At the meeting, they sat across from him, some with folded arms and cold eyes. They didn't ask about the letter or how their aunt came to her decision. Instead, they said things like, this isn't fair and she was sick. She didn't know what she was doing. One accused Mark of hiding the truth. Another claimed their aunt must have been pressured. No one asked about the time Mark spent caring for their aunt. No one brought up the days and nights he stayed by her side. They spoke only of money and property and how they deserved a share. They said things like, "We're still her family, too." And, "You can't just keep everything to yourself." Mark listened without raising his voice. He didn't want to argue. He knew what the document said. More than that, he knew what his aunt's letter meant, but the others refused to see it. They wanted him to feel guilty. They said their aunt wouldn't have done this if she had been thinking clearly. They told stories to make themselves look better. They spoke about birthdays and holidays from years ago, as if that proved they had always been there. But deep down they were angry because they were left out. Mark stayed firm. He explained that the will was final, signed and witnessed. He didn't need to defend his aunt's choice. He just reminded them that nothing had been done in secret. It was all handled by the lawyer. The truth was already written down. The room went quiet after that. No one had anything left to say. The anger didn't go away, but Mark could see the truth was starting to settle in. Whether they accepted it or not, the decision was not his to make. It had already been made. That night, Mark stayed in his room, holding his aunt's letter close. As he read the words again, memories from the past began to return, ones he had tried to forget. They weren't just from recent years. They went back much further. Growing up, he was often pushed aside. His siblings made him feel small, like his thoughts didn't matter. If he shared an idea, they ignored it. If he made a mistake, they laughed. When something went well for him, they acted like it wasn't important. No matter how hard he tried, it was never enough for them. As they all got older, the distance only grew. During family events, they barely spoke to him unless they had something negative to say. Sometimes they would talk over him or about him as if he wasn't there. When he chose different things in life, softer paths, quieter roles, they said he was weak. He never fought back. He kept to himself, thinking that maybe if he stayed kind, they'd treat him better. But they never did. When their aunt got sick, he made the choice to return home. He didn't do it for thanks or reward. He simply wanted to be there. But even then, the same pattern continued. His siblings questioned his every move. They said he was wasting his time. They told him he was making his life smaller by staying. None of them came to help, but they still judged him from afar. Now, sitting with the truth in his hands, Mark felt something shift inside. All those hurtful words, all the years of being made to feel less, no longer had power over him. His aunt had seen him, truly seen him, and made a choice that proved it. He didn't need anyone's approval anymore. The past had already shown him who they were. And his aunt's final act had shown him what love really meant. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be proved over and over. It was steady, honest, and strong. With that understanding, Mark felt something new. Not sadness, not anger, just strength. He wasn't the same boy they used to talk down to. He knew who he was now, and he would no longer accept less than he deserved. Mark received another call from Mr. Tainer. He asked him to come to his office again. When he arrived, he greeted him and explained that a formal review had been completed. A team of legal professionals had gone through every detail of his aunt's will. Every page, signature, and document had been checked. Nothing was missing. Everything was done properly. The lawyer explained that the process was complete. The house, savings, and other assets had already been moved to Mark's name. His aunt had made sure to take care of all the legal steps before she passed. There was no delay, no confusion, and nothing that could be challenged. Mark listened closely. He had known this before, but hearing it again made it feel final. There would be no court case, no changes. The law was on his side. Everything his aunt had wanted was now protected by legal authority. His siblings had tried to raise questions, but none of them had proof to support their claims. No one had any document or message that could undo the will. Mr. Tainer calmly explained that emotional complaints had no power against legal truth. The facts were clear. The decisions had been made long ago, and the system had already followed them through. Mark signed a few final papers confirming his full ownership. With each signature, the responsibility became real. It was no longer just about what had been left behind. It was about what he now had control over. He stepped out of the office with a clear mind. This wasn't about money or property alone. It was about something deeper. For the first time, he was no longer under anyone's shadow. All his life, he had been made to feel small, as if his voice didn't count. Now, both the law and his late aunt had spoken on his behalf. He didn't need to explain anything further. He didn't need to defend himself. The truth was not just personal. It was official, and those who once ignored him had no say in what came next. With calm steps, Mark walked away from the building. Knowing this chapter was now truly his. The days that followed were slow and thoughtful. Nothing rushed, nothing loud, just quiet reflection. Each morning brought a fresh sense of responsibility. The house felt different now, not because it looked new, but because everything inside it held meaning. Every drawer, every photo, every note held a piece of the woman who had loved deeply and given all she had. A decision began to take shape. The money wasn't just for comfort. It had purpose. It could be used in ways that honored a life well lived. Plans started forming. Visits were made to places his aunt once cared about. Small organizations doing real work. A clinic that treated the sick without asking for payment. A school in need of supplies. A shelter for widows who had no one left. Calls were made, not through headlines or with attention, but in private, humble ways. Questions were asked. What do you need most? How can support go further? What would bring the biggest relief? And help was given. Not as a grand gesture, but with care, the same way his aunt had once offered small kindnesses to others. Though there was peace in giving, one boundary remained firm. There would be no portion set aside for the ones who had turned away. They had made themselves distant when it mattered most. When asked to stand by their own aunt, they chose absence. And after her passing, they chose greed. No anger sat in that decision, only clarity. The past could not be erased by false smiles or sudden regret. The will had been written with purpose, and that purpose would be respected. Love doesn't always mean returning to what once hurt. Sometimes it means protecting what was left in trust. Suggestions came from neighbors and extended family. Some thought he should let it go. Others said, "There's still your blood." But none of them had felt the weight of being dismissed for years. None of them had cared for a dying relative while being mocked for doing so. This choice wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Some things once broken cannot return to what they were. And not all forgiveness must come with a gift. Instead, something more lasting was being built. One good deed at a time. A new story rooted in the values passed down by an aunt who saw the quiet strength her nephew carried all along. Mark stepped outside and closed the door behind him. In his hand, he held the house key, knowing it would be the last time he used it. The home that once held so many moments, good and painful, now stood empty. He paused on the steps and looked back, not with sadness, but with quiet strength. Inside, the rooms were bare, but his heart felt full. Not with fear, not with confusion, just calm. Everything he needed was no longer tied to the walls of that house. It had served its purpose. It had held the last part of his time with his aunt. Now that time had passed, and he was ready to move forward. Mark had walked out of that house once before, pushed out and hurt. But today was different. Today, no one had power over him. No one was shouting. No one was waiting to break him down. He walked freely, without guilt, without second-guessing himself. At the gate, he turned around for a final look. His eyes moved over the windows and the roof. So much had happened there. Loss, love, truth. He had stayed through it all, and he had left with his dignity. He held his aunt's letter close, tucked safely in his bag. That letter reminded him of who he was and who his aunt knew he could be. It gave him the courage to choose his own future, not one shaped by others. The road ahead was open. He didn't need a perfect plan. What he needed he already had. Peace, freedom, and the right to start fresh. There was no weight pulling him back. He had given. He had waited. And he had forgiven in his own way. With steady steps, he walked away from the house. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a door closing softly behind him with no bitterness. What lay ahead wasn't certain, but it belonged to him alone. He didn't need to turn back again. Everything important was already carried within him. As he continued down the path, he felt something new. Not joy or sorrow, but balance. For the first time, he was not trying to please anyone. He had made his choice. He was moving on, and that was enough.